New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Raven Alliance, Zenith Jump Point, Ramgar, June 4th, 3152. Rin sat up straight in the Rabbit's Foot's conference room chair, trying desperately to resist the temptation to rudely look down at her tablet to see the time. Vasil stood behind her, up against the steel wall, while Cal slumped a little bit in his chair just to the right of hers. Across the table, representatives from the Raven Alliance sat and looked over the digital documentation that had been shared with them. They had been doing this for what felt like 10 minutes, and every second seemed to slow to a crawl. Behind them stood a surly-looking elemental in ice blue and white camo fatigues. She seemed to be sizing Vasil up just in case the two had to settle a matter physically. When they boarded the Rabbit's Foot, they had introduced themselves as Star Captain Imus Mechwarrior and Star Captain Abigail Shu. There was some immediate discomfort, but that had faded a bit as both sides of the meeting understood there was little risk of conflict. A few more minutes passed, and finally one of the two ravens at the table looked up to ask, "So, you would like us to believe that you're here for a purely scientific and economic mission funded by the Draconis Combine and, apparently, ill-clan Wolf?" Rin leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the table, palms up, before responding, "That is the case. I feel very strongly that mankind's hope and destiny lay outside the inner sphere. History is littered with examples of one-time foes finding common ground through scientific endeavors. I think that there is an opportunity here for the Raven Alliance that is mutually beneficial for all parties." "The platitudes are unnecessary, though we do appreciate the respect you have shown us by being so open and honest," Mechwarrior replied. When Star Captain Shu spoke, her body language was that of disinterest, and she pushed the tablet Rin shared with the documents away from her a few centimeters before asking, "So what exactly do you want from us?" "Well," Rin said, pausing for a second before continuing, "we've recently parted ways with our aerospace assets, and while we did seek to hire, the edge of Combine space is not known for being well stocked with pilots seeking work." "The Raven Alliance is not well stocked with mercenaries either, unless you are implying that we are for sale," Shu retorted. Rin recoiled a bit, realizing she had walked right into that by oversharing. She replied quickly, "Oh, of course not. However, for a mission as important as ours, with implications for the entire region, it seems obvious to seek your partnership. I don't offer payment, I offer something much more worthwhile: information, data, and knowledge." "What specifically are you asking for?" Mechwarrior asked. Rin felt a boost in confidence as it seemed that she was making headway. Cal sat up a bit as well as Rin said, "We would appreciate the aid of 2 pilots with aerospace fighters, and any technicians necessary to maintain them. The duration is unknown, however, I would expect up to a year." The 2 ravens at the table turned and spoke to each other in hushed tones. Rin looked up and saw that the elemental was still staring at Vasil. Mechwarrior turned back to Rin and asked, "What connection do you have to Clan Jade Falcon?" Rin was about to respond, but then she paused and turned towards Vasil before saying to him, "Want to take this one?" Vasil spoke in his usual plain tone when he explained, "Clan Jade Falcon abandoned me. I am no longer of that or any clan." That response led to some more hushed commentary between the 2 Raven Star Captains. They seemed to be disagreeing, which made Rin furrow her brow and sigh quietly with worry. Cal tapped Rin's boot with his own, and he gave her a look that reminded her to relax. Eventually, Mechwarrior turned back to Rin and said, "We want first notice of any commercial or industrial findings within 200 light-years of Raven Alliance territory, and at least a 6-month delay before notifying your other backers." Rin shook her head slowly before responding, "I can't do that. It would directly violate my other signed contracts. I cannot sacrifice my honor in that way. I can offer you the open book technical information on all findings at the same time that we share it with the others. Your pilots would be able to confirm it in the field." The ravens looked at each other, clearly disagreeing with the path forward. Mechwarrior leaned back and waved his hand as he said, "Then be gone with you." Rin was about to argue the point when Star Captain Shu jumped in and said, "I will offer you what you wish, though my pilots would take double your normal crew share of anything you find of technical or economic use." Mechwarrior looked over at his peer like she had just left a dagger in his back. Rin watched the dichotomy of offended and smug Raven faces and knew when to keep her mouth shut. Clearly there was something going on between these two star captains. After a few seconds, McCorkle recovered his composure and the deal was done. Digital documents were signed and the Ravens returned to their transport. As Cal joined Rin at the closed airlock, he said, "Well, that was awkward in a way I didn't expect." Rin sighed with a slight smile on her face and replied, "It reminds me of the early grades of the academy when the girls would jockey for social standing at lunch." "Dangerous games," Cal said. 3 hours later, Rin and Cal waited outside the flight deck to welcome the 2 new Raven Alliance aerospace pilots. Once the deck was repressurized, the bay doors opened and they stepped in. The 2 pilots were climbing out of their Corax aerospace fighters. As they closed the distance, Rin looked over at Cal and said, "Behave yourself." "How am I in trouble? I didn't even say anything yet," Cal said, looking offended. Pulling off their helmets, the 2 pilots were the picture of youthful determination. "Welcome to the Rabbit's Foot. I am Captain Rin Barrett, and this is Lieutenant Cal Levitt," Rin said with a warm smile. "I'm Cadet Washi, 5th Raven Auxiliaries, Delta Garrison Galaxy," said the first pilot, who wasn't more than 1.5 meters tall. As soon as he finished, the other pilot stated, "I am Cadet Noel, also from the 5th Raven Auxiliaries, Delta Garrison Galaxy." "Wait, you're cadets?" Cal asked with some concern on his face. "Yes, sir," answered Noel. Cal and Rin shared a concerned look before Cal asked, "How close are you to your trials of position?" Washi responded, "Star Captain Shu stated that our performance on this mission would substitute for our trials of position if we face combat." "Do you have any combat experience?" Cal pushed, looking for something to reassure himself that this wasn't a complete disaster. Noel answered, "I have flown against pirates. I did not score a kill, but I contributed to the victory." Cal nodded, then looked over at Washi, but the pilot shook his head no. There were a few seconds of silence before Cal asked, "Coraxes, huh?" as he gestured toward the aerospace fighters painted in light blue. "Yes, sir," Washi said. "They are C variants, so there is plenty of punch." "I assume those crates that came over on the transport have plenty of streak LRMs?" Cal asked. "Yes, sir," Noel responded. Rin's brain kicked back into gear, and she reached out to pat the 2 pilots on their shoulders while saying, "Welcome aboard. Let's get you settled up in your bunks, and you can meet the rest of the team." New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Draconis Combine, Zenith Jump Point, Chirala, June 8th, 3152. "Are you ready to show us your moves?" Olivia asked into the comlink as she went through the simulator's startup process. She could almost hear his smile through the link before he chuckled and said, "I do like an overconfident Mechwarrior. They're so much easier to stomp." "Promises, promises," Olivia retorted. The wraparound screen of the simulator flickered on and showed an expansive subalpine forest ahead of her Thunderbolt. The ground was at a good 20-degree angle, leading up to mountains in the distance. Somewhere out there was an axeman that needed to be brought down. She pushed her battle mech into a slow trot, heading uphill to take the high ground and hopefully spot the axeman early. With the ER medium lasers, LB-20X, and carrying that menacing hatchet, the last thing Olivia wanted was to be surprised with a close-range fight. At least she had daylight, and the trees were light enough that Max couldn't be too sneaky. Outside the training pods, Tenica and the 2 new Raven pilots watched the fight from several different views. She had invited Vasil, but he said he needed to work on his armor. She sensed that he wasn't entirely comfortable around the 2 Snow Raven cadets, and she didn't really blame him. After what he experienced with his own group of Sibco cadets, anyone would be wary. It's just a shame that clan warriors tend to be so incapable of showing that they're hurting. Tenica felt like she had made inroads with Vasil over the past few months, but who knows now that Noel and Washi are wandering around the ship. As Olivia approached the more rocky terrain, the trees gave way to patches of snowpack melting under the late spring sun. The simulated Thunderbolt handled much like a real one, though it would never quite be exactly the same. Pivoting, she backed the Thunderbolt up against a boulder and scanned for movement and then heat under infrared. "You know, usually the new guy takes some crap for a while. Would you like me to go easy on you?" Olivia chided over the comlink. Max's chuckling in return made Olivia smile, though his response caught her off guard. Just as he replied, "On your left," the Axeman rose from a dip in the terrain and began to run toward the Thunderbolt. Its Guardian electronics package had done its job and let the Axeman get close. With the situation suddenly becoming perilous, Olivia twisted toward her opponent and began to move her mech backwards. She lined up her PPC and fired it at the Axeman's center of mass. The artificial lightning slammed into the Axeman's left torso, causing a shower of sparks and melted armor to fly in all directions. To Max's credit, the Axeman continued to march forward, barely reacting to the substantial hit. With every backward step, Olivia was watching the distance tick down. When the PPC was ready to fire again, she halted her mech and took careful aim. Just as the Axeman crossed into range, she squeezed the triggers to fire everything she had in a single Alpha Strike volley. Her medium lasers joined the PPC in tearing across the Axeman's torso as it rapidly twisted to spread the damage out across the armored chest. The SRM struck a few seconds later, peppering the arm and ripping away more armor. The simulator flooded the cockpit with heat, making Olivia gasp for air. Max struck back hard, firing his lasers and LB-20X in response. The beams of light cut across her shoulder, doing light damage, but the shotgun-like autocannon nearly knocked her mech over. Even at long range, the weapon was dangerous. Thankfully, the distance dulled the impact a bit, and many of the rounds missed entirely. Olivia pushed forward, moving in a diagonal further up the hill from the Axeman, as it still closed on her. Leaning against the railing, Tenica turned to see the reactions on the Raven pilots' faces. They seemed interested, if a little bemused by the whole thing. Curious, Tenica asked, "What do you think?" "The Thunderbolt's only advantage was the PPC. She should have turned and retreated in order to keep its distance on the Axeman," Noel said. Washi nodded in agreement and then added, "We were taught that the Inner Sphere Mechwarriors tend to be over-aggressive and reckless in their attacks. Ravens are more precise." "Ah, good to know," Tenica responded. She turned back to watch the fight. Tenica pondered just how well these two were going to settle in. Closing fast, the Axeman fired again with the autocannon, which caught Olivia's Thunderbolt in the right hip. The large rounds cracked armor panels and dug into the internal structure. Olivia was still moving, but the grinding of armor and a pedal that started to shudder told her that there was something seriously wrong with her right leg's actuators. Giving up on the run, she twisted back to face down the Axeman and fired her SRMs and the PPC for a third time. It hit the Axeman in the torso again, this time both lightning and missiles cutting deep into that left side. At just a few dozen meters apart, the mechs traded more laser fire. Tenica frowned a bit as she watched the two mechs pummel each other. When she saw the Axeman raise its right arm, lifting that huge axe up into the sky, she felt like this was just about over. Being impossible not to telegraph that move, Olivia was prepared for what would likely be a devastating physical attack as the Axeman closed in on her. When the axe went up, she shifted her left arm up to meet it, stepped closer, nearly face to face with the other battle mech. Ignoring her instincts to want to get away from the weapon, Olivia knew that her best shot was to get closer. Sure enough, when Max brought the axe down on the Thunderbolt, most of the blade missed the Thunderbolt's shoulder. It cut deep into the back of it, but most of the energy was transferred through the neck of the weapon as it crashed down. Returning the gesture, Olivia lashed out with her right arm, punching deep into the Axeman's already gaping left torso. It destroyed the barrel of her PPC, but this was all or nothing. She flexed her mech's fingers deep into the internal structure and then pulled back with all of her might. The Axeman shuddered, then stopped moving entirely as the Thunderbolt retreated from his chest, holding a large chunk of internal structure, wiring, and ripped Mechwarrior cabling. "Oh, did you need this?" Olivia said into the comlink as she held up the Axeman's now externalized internal structure. The low lights of the simulator turned on as the system shut down. The virtual triumph faded to black as Olivia pulled off her neurohelmet and popped the hatch. As she climbed out onto the metal decking, Tenica was clapping while the two Raven pilots were standing at attention. Olivia wiped the sweat from her brow with the towel she pulled from the table next to the simulator and asked, "Well, how was the free show?" "I'm not sure I've ever seen a mech win in physical combat with an Axeman before," Tenica said. "How about you two?" Olivia asked as she tossed the towel to the table and put her hands on her hips. "Congratulations on your victory," Washi said with some trepidation. His eyes looked briefly up into Olivia's, but then back down to the ground. Noelle crooked her head a little bit and asked, "How did you know to step closer rather than try to back up?" Towering over the young pilot by almost a foot, Olivia couldn't help but feel a little maternal instinct kick in as the Raven asked the question. She smiled and responded, "A little bit of experience, and a lot of watching holovids of old Solaris gladiatorial matches when I was a kid." Both Ravens nodded as if they understood, but as Olivia marched past them to talk to Max, who was just climbing out of his pod, Noelle asked Washi, What is a Solaris gladiatorial match? The question had barely left her lips when Tenika's hand slapped down on each of their shoulders. Oh, you have so much fun ahead of you on this trip. Olivia took her time, and her victory marched to Max's pod, where he was still slowly crawling out. Now, what was that about stomping you said earlier? She asked with a grin on her face. Max laughed, running his hand through his wet dark hair before saying, Would it count if I said I was jump-lagged? Oh, it definitely counts, Olivia said, crossing her arms over her chest. At least it was close, Max said as he grabbed his towel. Olivia nodded before saying, Close only counts in darts and orbital bombardments. End Part 3. As always, thank you for watching and or listening. If you want to support this creative effort, the free option is to hit the like and subscribe buttons and perhaps share the story with someone else who might enjoy it. If you are in a position to do so, channel memberships are inexpensive and a good way to go toward keeping this grand experiment running. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.